And we're looking at two bears near the maple tree. And we're going to write this from scratch starting now. So let me tell you a story. Okay. Grandpa Emmett might have been about to die from all the claw marks in his skin, where he now bled through his bandages, but Clementine, alright, am I spelling that right? No, I put an extra E in. But Clementine was not the one who did it. It was that other bear outside the cabin, hidden. Let me put another comma here. We're going to break a bunch of commas. It was that other bear outside the cabin, hidden in the shadows of the night. She listened for the beast's growl, and she pushed her long blonde hair behind her ears, but heard nothing. Her bloody fingers left stains along the light strands of hair like dye. Okay. Make that a new paragraph. The bear out there who had done this to Clementine's grandpa. I keep putting that extra E into Clementine. I don't know why I'm doing that. Alright, the bear out there that did this to Clementine's grandpa could not enter the cabin. On account of the bear's choices and the magic power Grandpa still possessed. If he died tonight, she didn't know how those rules might change. Alright. He coughed up blood onto his whiskered chin, and she knew he could not wait until morning. She was going to have to go for help now. And let me keep that same paragraph. So, into the darkness she fled, making sure to close the cabin door firm behind her. It wasn't the thing that was going to protect him from what had injured him so out here. But she wanted the door closed so she wouldn't have to hear his weak cries of protest, telling her not to go. She crossed the dooryard in 3 strides and stuck to the trail. She crossed the dooryard in 3 strides and stuck to the trail winding down the slope. In the deeper darkness of nighttime shadows under the full trees. Sticking. Did I already say sticking? Yeah. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. It's a different verb form. It'll be alright. Sticking to the trail proper made her an easier target. But as a little girl running blind through the trees would pose greater dangers. Still, she tripped over the exposed roots as she went. Let's say as she ran along. Okay, she tripped over exposed roots as she ran along. Clementine found herself on the edge of overbalanced forward most of the way. The bear growled. It was the one who had torn into her grandpa. Of course it was. No other beast, great or small, would dare to enter this territory as long as such a monster as this still lurked. After it tasted blood, especially Grandpa Emmett's blood, it wasn't going anywhere. The fact that it announced itself on Clementine's trail told her it had no fear of her and might be toying with her before finishing the job it had failed to complete on Grandpa. She hated the beast for what it was and what it had done for all the good that hate would bring. Say achieve. She continued her headlong run, despite all evidence that this mission might be pointless. She whispered out breathy words between gasps of air. At least I'm leading it away. Small victories were still victories, even if, say, especially if there were no greater successes to celebrate. She barely registered the sweep of the furry paw and its great dark daggers of claws before the strike lifted her off her feet and launched her to the northwest, off the trail in the air. The monster was closer than she realized. Clementine bounced off a couple trees on her way back to the ground, but far fewer than she expected to strike. The rocks hidden. Let's fix strike there. Alright. The rocks hidden below, let's say under. The rocks hidden under years of leaves made up for that lucky break as she tumbled across the ground bruising and cutting herself up. Let's say the treetops shook as the great bear forced its way between them in passes that should have been too tight. It left dark fur hanging from the rougher patches of bark as it passed. Alright. Clementine stood with an effort and turned to face the lumbering monster as it charged her. Ignoring the peril she was in, the charging motion of a bear was almost comical, as if it had gotten fat and was still getting used to moving all that weight. Bears looked more imposing when they were still, she thought. You look ridiculous, she growled at the much larger creature. It stopped within feet of her, staring. Okay, let me put a comma there. Staring into her eyes with the dark marbles that made the bear look devilish and without soul. It raised on its hind legs. It raised on its hind legs and bared its terrible claws. And, of course, it roared to shake the world. Is that all you got? Clementine taunted. The bear struck her again on its way down to all fours. She lifted in the air and staggered backward, but not as far, let's say not nearly as far as before. There was a lot less power in that second attack. There's a lot less power in that second attack, but she had already suffered the first, so it added to the pain. Clementine bounced off a hardwood trunk with no give. As she stumbled forward on the rebound, she saw stars that had nothing to do with the night. Her knees were watery, and there was no telling what might be going on in her jostled brain. All right, hold on. Let me fix the typo there. Her knees were watery, and their word's probably not the right word, but I'm going to leave it there. Her knees were watery, and there was no telling what might be going on in her jostled brain. But she kept her feet and squared herself before the bear again. "Are you done?" she asked. The bear, with its dead black eyes, stared at her as if it didn't quite know how to proceed. Clementine had just enough time to think bears looked fairly stupid, with their dumb black eyes when they stood still looking at you. She had no time to come up with another clever quip before the bear took hold of her again. This time, it locked on with its terrible teeth, and she screamed as the points broke her skin. The bear lifted her into the air within its powerful jaws and whipped her from side to side in the fashion wild animals tended to do. After several seconds where everything in the world blurred with the back and forth motion, except for the pain, which remained clear and focused. The bear released her in a spin, and she skipped a little farther down the slope and away from the trail. The bear took its time pacing after her for another go. And that was the first of its grave mistakes. Maybe attacking her grandpa was its first fatal error. But no one else was there to decide the matter. Clementine rolled to her stomach as she started to change. She wished she had worn a different dress, because this was one of her favorites and she'd never get to wear it again. The material tore off her as her body expanded and covered in fur darker than that of the bear that had attacked her and Grandpa. Her claws extended, black and bloody, from her hands, turning into deadly paws. Her teeth grew and sharpened as her jaws shifted into a snout ready to bite and tear. The first bear arrived just in time to see that it now faced a second. Clementine, the bear, was smaller than this beast, but she attacked from underneath its throat with a vengeance. The bears turned in each bears are hot right now, I tell you. Again, I stole this title from Armand, so we're writing Two Bears Near the Maple Tree, Frank, in case you just got here. All right, I don't know if they're going to explode or not. I know that's the hot new thing, exploding bears, really. But I don't know that I have what it takes to write a good exploding bear story. Do you know anyone, Frank, who can write a good exploding bear story that does a justice to the exploding bears? The bears turned in each other's grasps as Clementine refused to release her teeth from the monster's throat. The first bear tried to twist away. Maybe it would have even retreated, and things might have turned out differently. But that is not what happened. Nope, you can't think of anybody. That's too bad, Frank. I don't mind if you promote your bear story. I know I want to read it as soon as it's ready. Maybe would it have even retreated and things might have turned out differently, but that is not how this night played out. Exploding bears. Alright. And Clementine was in a fury even before she transformed. They slammed each other into trees and tore, let's say peeled the bark away in sheets as they tore into each other. Okay, despite her advantage, Clementine found herself on her back and fighting to get out from under the mass of the larger bear. She squirmed and twisted, kicking up great clouds of dirt and dust in their struggle. All other night creatures had gone silent or fled the scene, leaving the woods for these two creatures to fight over. Okay, Clementine did... Alright, I put that extra E in again. Clementine is just not the easiest name for me to spell on the fly. Clementine did get to her feet and was able to square herself once more on even ground. The larger monster held off for a second as a growl, let's say as a low growl, rumbled in the back of its deep throat. Maybe I should rename this story Deep Throat. What do you think, Frank? Is that a good story for... Is that a good story about... good title for a story about bears? The larger monster held off a second as a low growl rumbled in the back of its deep throat. Clementine... Oh, I left out an E this time. Good Lord. We really just have an odd number of E's in the English language. We just use them everywhere for everything. Clementine feigned an attack. All right, let me see if I can use feigned correctly. Feigned an attack, and the larger creature retreated a step, bracing itself for the resumption of the fight. But then Clementine turned and retreated through the trees, through the forest, in that silly, lumbering charge that her kind tended to do. The larger animal growled, possibly at being tricked, and pursued. Clementine was Clementine was able to squeeze through tighter spaces, but she wasn't that much smaller than her attacker. The other bear stayed close. Clementine reached open ground first and broke into a harder run through the grasses and up the slope. She knew the other bear would close the distance once it was free of the trees as well, and that is what happened as the beast's growls, let's say roars, filled the night. A bright red line of setting sun cut the horizon like a bloody slash, telling Clementine it was not nearly as late as she originally thought. This night had gotten out of her control quite quickly. The monster roared again. Alright. You should incorporate the word snazzy into the stories. There you go. I'll figure out how to get snazzy in there. Hold on, Frank. Have faith in me. Alright. The monster roared again and was closer than Clementine thought. That seemed to be a theme of this terrible day. The last of the light. Snazzy. Highlight my message, snazzy. There you go. Alright. It's coming up. It's coming up. Give me a second here. The last of the light caught the bright red fall leaves of the lone maple tree, standing tall and bright on top of the next hill, where it had been all of Clementine's life. Here, I got the maple tree in there from the title. Now we got to get snazzy in there. Could be a snazzy tree, but that's not how I want to use it. Alright. She picked up speed. Wool. Oh, woo, okay. That's an exclamation point. Alright, she picked up speed powered by nothing more than hope. Maybe false hope. But to her own surprise, she plunged over the line, past where the iron fencing had fallen long ago. She stumbled through gravestones covered in green and white growths. Say some faded. Some faded until they had to be felt in order to be read. Alright, gravestones, I believe, is a compound word. Yes, alright. Alright. Her fur withdrew. Her bones re-knit themselves. Say her claws and teeth retracted faster than was comfortable. She had violated this land, and it was forcing her back into a natural form with the power of magic and the universe. Her growls turned into the screams of a tortured little girl. Her dress, of course, was gone. The cold bit at her skin, and the untended grasses itched her exposed legs. The bear behind her pulled up short and roared its disapproval from the safe edge. Clementine didn't care if it dared to follow her this time or not. This was going to be over either way. She felt and read her way through the family plot. There was still ruddy light left in the sky on this exposed hill, and even though she could still read the inscriptions, why does it say could is misspelled? It is not misspelled. Even though she could still read the inscriptions between her and the trunk of the great old maple, she suspected some of that came from memory. Mom's, would that be the same paragraph because we're talking about inscription? Yes, it's going to be the same paragraph. Mom's grave declared her a loving mother. Dad's said he was a loving husband. Grandma's called her the mother of the whole family, and so on past the graves of Cousin Martin, Uncle Willard, a great Uncle Dole she never met, say Uncle Snazzy. Did you catch that, Frank? Uncle Snazzy. She heard stories about her whole life, and the grave of a manservant of her great grandfather, a fellow named Francis Edler, who earned a spot in this plot. The great grandparents were buried on the other side of the tree. Clementine set to digging just past the graves of Snazzy and Edler, nearest the base of the tree. Then that damn bear did cross the line, and it started to transform as well. Clementine wondered how long it had been since it was anything other than a bear. Probably quite a while. She went on digging until she felt the hard edges of the box. Then she fought to get that free as well. Let's say as her claws finally vanished, Clementine's sister held onto the headstones of two modest graves, flexing, okay, I'll put a comma there, flexing her fingers as if getting used to having human hands again. Clementine freed the box finally and forced its mud-caked lid open. "Look at me," the girl's voice croaked from lack of use. Clementine stood again to her full height, still inches shorter than her older sister. They both stood naked in their family graveyard. "You think you can beat me by bringing me here. I think Grandpa Emmett needs help because of you, Lucy. That's all I care about." "I think Grandpa Emmett needs help because of you, Lucy. That's all I care about. He needs to die so both of us can be free. He can't even turn into a bear anymore. You should have left him alone. He's the last one, Clementine." Lucy held out her hands as if begging. "Once he is gone, we never have to be this again. You don't have to be anything even now. You choose to stalk. You choose to stalk the woods as a monster all the time. That is your choice. Alright, let's say Clementine held her hands clasped behind her back like she had done when she was very little. Lucy dropped her begging hands to her sides. Lucy dropped her begging hands to her sides. The fingers kept opening and closing like claws. If they did not stand in a cemetery, she probably would still be in her bare form and would be attacking her sister as she had done to Grandpa earlier. We can never live among normal people. Not like this. We've lived a good life up here. This is no life. You need to let me into that cabin to finish this. It's not mine to invite you in, Lucy. Then you drag him out, and this will all be over finally. I would never, and you are a monster for even asking. Lucy reached out faster than Clementine was ready for. She seized a handful of Clementine's blonde hair that had bits of leaves and stains of her grandpa's blood in it. Clementine had, spell that right. Clementine had always thought it was funny that her human hair was lighter than Lucy's black hair. But their bear fur was the opposite. Nothing much was funny anymore. Lucy dragged her younger sister toward the edge of the graveyard. Stop, Clementine cried. Lucy kept dragging her along, bumping her shins into family gravestones along the way. Stop, Lucy. Quiet this time. Pleading. He dies tonight. This is where it all ends. Lucy, just stop. Lucy stepped out from between the outermost stones, and fur erupted around her swelling limbs that still held her sister's hair in the growing claws. Clementine brought her hands out from behind her back and pressed the bore of the weapon up into her sister's rib cage as it grew. The hammer clicked, and then the boom rolled across the hills like thunder. The silver slug buried itself deep in Lucy's guts. The older sister finally let go. She staggered and fell dead, half in and half out of the family cemetery. She started to revert, but died before she could return fully to one form or the other. It left her distorted and ugly. Clementine dropped the weapon into the grass and fell to her knees crying. She wept until well after dark. Despite everything, there would be a burial. I'll say despite everything Lucy had done. Despite everything Lucy had done, there would be a burial, but not tonight. Grandpa Emmett still needed help, and Clementine needed a new dress. She found her feet, turned her back on her sister, and made her way toward the trail again.